Kicking us off today will be Darren Anderson, CEO and co-founder of Next Robotics, chairman and founder of Nest Cowork, and co-producer of Seamless Podcast. Welcome, Darren.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Just getting unmuted there. Hope everyone is doing well. This is I think, a very topical and timely opportunity for us all to get together to talk about this important topic. The digital workplace is revolutionizing the world that we're living. Gone are the days when people work from an office, not only with COVID, but a general sense of people distributing their efforts across time zones and physical locations. What we're going to do in today's seminar is share some of the latest tools, techniques, and tactics from experts in the field, talking about their specific situations and moving from a non-COVID to COVID world, some of the lessons learned, and some ways that we all can take information back to our organizations and address the new needs of our users, end users, customers, employees, and partners. Jennifer?
All right. Well, thank you, Darren. Today we will be looking at a few things focusing on the security needs for IT. So that would be traversing the IT environments in a COVID-19 world, the operations in the new abnormal, securing the endpoint versus the centralized data model, and a very interesting case study from Darren Bennett with the city of San Diego. First, I would like to talk a little bit about our wonderful presenters today. I call them our cybersecurity guides. I love these guys. They're so knowledgeable. First, we have Tom Caldwell, CTO and GM of Techniche Americas. He's a veteran of Cisco and Microsoft and has deep expertise in delivering cloud-based software products and large-scale AI machine learning software systems to enterprise and service providers. Tom now leads the Techniche Group as Group CTO, helping to shape a new vision for AI ML monitoring of light industry, IoT, and is an experienced industry leader in cybersecurity, cloud infrastructure, and AI ML. We also have Sean Ernst, Director of Technology from Centrix IT. Sean has served on the Cisco Service Provider Advisory Council since 2018 and leads technology development at Centrix IT with a passion for finding cutting-edge solutions for clients. He is skilled in technology leadership, IT security, IT research and development, ITIL-based IT service management, and digital transformation of mid-market businesses. Lastly, we have Darren Bennett, Chief Information Security Officer for the City of San Diego. Darren is a global information cybersecurity leader with more than 20 years experience in information security, including serving as regional coordinator for the FBI Computer Science Program. He has expertise in all aspects of cyber information and physical security. As the Chief Information Security Officer for the City of San Diego, Darren is responsible for the security of all information systems used by the city. With that, I would like to have Tom kick us off today for IT security and working from home in a COVID-19 world. Tom?
Thanks, Jennifer. The risks are considerable. With this work from home trend likely to remain in place for some time, the enterprises really need to learn or find a long-term sustainable ways to secure their remote workforces and their devices and their networks, which could be a tough challenge, right? And there's greater burden on the employee to take more responsibility for cybersecurity. They need to become more aware, right? In fact, in a recent Capita survey, 92% of employees say that they believe it's their organization's job to secure remote working at home. But many don't even think that their policies are effective. So, you are a liability to your business, and we all need to realize that. We just can't, like we used to go to the office and just let IT or SecOps worry about, our cybersecurity safety, but we can't do that now. And the threat landscape at home is changing, right? And it's not just because of COVID and we're working from home, but now there's smart everything in the home, right? And meaning IoT is changing that threat landscape also at the same time that we're trying to secure a remote workplace, right? And I'm probably the worst offender. I have an Alexa in every single room. I tell her to turn on the lights, change the thermostat, and I probably shouldn't say this, but she's got control of my front door lock now. So she's taken over. But being a techno geek, I sort of enjoy it. But again, it creates this big porous landscape like Swiss cheese, a threat landscape. And it's really challenging for the enterprise IT to secure it. Next slide, please. We're supposed to wear protective face masks when we go out in public, and but what's the equivalent to your computer and your network wearing a face mask? In the security industry, we've adopted what we call zero trust, and I think this still needs to apply as we connect remote workers in, right? And zero trust, in the beginning, it was you trust once when you log in, and then you're trusted throughout that whole session, right? But now we need to have zero trust and what we call continuous verification, right? So we need to continuously verify that you can be trusted while you're online and while you're connected into your organization's resources and such, and that's where AI really comes in and machine learning, because, I think Darren's going to talk to us about 13,000 employees or so that he's got remote working all of a sudden in a big city. And, it's being able to monitor all those connections at once is really tough. In fact, I remember working with a smart city where, a contractor was, they didn't change the password on their remote router. They got through, infected the contractor's computer, and then they VPN'd into a smart city, and you could just see the strange entity coming in and doing reconnaissance and doing anomalous behaviors, right? So
not this city though, right?
Oh, no, never at this city, right? Yes,
just
another
making sure.
But this zero trust, some of these best practices need to be adapted for the remote worker, right? And everyone needs to be increasingly aware of their digital surroundings, right? Like I'm up in a high rise there in that cartoon, but we're all digitally connected. Do I have malware and I'm unaware? Do my neighbors have malware and they're tapping into my network? You don't really know, right? And so you got to just become more aware of your surroundings, right? And we may be dealing with COVID super spreader events now, but we've been dealing with Mirai botnet spreading events for a while now, and they're out there scanning your home network, scanning your home routers, and looking for ways to get into your home so they can sit and wait for you to VPN into your organization, right? And again, I'm going to remind everyone that as homes get smarter and more interconnected, smart TVs, smart everything, they're all connected on your home network, but the IT group, they don't have responsibility to come in and monitor your home network. That'd be a privacy invasion, right? So they've got to do it remotely. They got to do it smarter, but it really is a responsibility of the remote worker to be in the know, to get trained, and we all just got to get smarter about cybersecurity, right? Next slide, please. The other thing this new abnormal has done is brought operational teams together that might not have worked closely before, right? So obviously you've got IT and SecOps, but you also have facilities and the business leaders who care about productivity in this new time. And so it's really aligning teams and making them come together. The office, most of my colleagues are changing their offices now to become communication hubs for meetings, right? Where you could still do whiteboarding, but people are going to work from home and just get together occasionally in a clean office to be able to collaborate, because you still need that and that face-to-face every once in a while. We used to think 10 years ago, I remember in cybersecurity, we were going, oh, we need to become less reactive and more proactive, and we invested in a lot of new security tools to do that. And now it feels like we're back to the starting point again, because now the perimeter just got broader and wider, and it includes networks and devices that the IT group don't have governance over, right? And so So again, back to, we're all connected. We're becoming more so every day, and we got to do better in securing ourselves, right? That means training is going to be the key to reducing remote worker liability risks. So I see, there's needs to be a lot of changes around this. And then, this whole idea, I'm just going to say it again, because that does worry me, that the smart everything in the home just causes so much uncertainty about, what you can trust and how to secure that remote home when you can't, really get in there and put monitoring tools in there. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker, and Sean's going to talk about securing the endpoint in a VDI.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tom. Good morning to everyone. So yeah, I'm going to just touch on briefly kind of two examples of, when the traditional securing the endpoint model versus going to more of a centralized data model. And the example I'm going to use is VDI. So I'll touch lightly on them. They're not going to be exact in both these scenarios. I think in the end, what you'll see is a hybrid may be the best model, but I at least want to touch on some of the key points and differentiators between a traditional secure the endpoint model and a centralized data model. So the first going to talk about, and this is what most people have seen. I think we all did this before COVID, that you would connect from home using a VPN to a corporate network to access resources, whether that's files, standalone files, applications, etc. This is what we've seen for years, that this has kind of been the standard. It's certainly changed a little bit, adding two-factor authentication to the VPN, additional security protocols that you may have. But typically in this model, what we would see is that this is what everyone traditionally had been doing, just enhancing it with some security, here and there. You go to the next slide, Jennifer, please. So in the centralized data model, the example you use is VDI, and really the biggest difference in the VPN, the traditional accessing of data with a VPN and VDI, really comes down to what device you're using to get to that data. So before, with a traditional endpoint, you would have a device that was assigned to you. You would have your credentials to the device, credentials to get into any auxiliary systems that you may have, and that's how you would access your data. Going the VDI route, the biggest difference, and I think where it becomes device agnostic. So it doesn't matter which device you're connecting from. It could be any of them, tablets, a personal laptop, because you're using that device really as the proxy to get access to that data. If you could go to the next slide. Perfect. So between the two models, the benefits, what you'll see from the endpoint model is it really benefits the end user more than it does the organization. Why? Because the endpoint gives them a little more flexibility. They have more access, on-demand access to the data, where they don't typically have to jump through hoops. Now, there may be some things that you're putting on the endpoints like disk encryption, the two-factor authentication, any sort of additional security layered on top, but the benefits typically are more towards the end user. It's also less dependent on internet. Going the VDI route and kind of a centralized data model really is dependent on internet, because that's the mechanism you need to be able to get access to the data. So for those remote on-the-go employees, remote sales staff, that sort of thing, typically they're going to want more on-demand access to data as opposed to, logging into a VDI session to get access to it. In the VDI model, what you'll typically see more is it's more scalable, and it provides less management overhead to the IT team. So it does benefit the organization a little better, because you're not having to reach out and touch each individual endpoint. You're securing a pool of VDI sessions that are hosted somewhere and administering it from one location as opposed to each endpoint independently. It also, and I think the biggest benefit is it does become endpoint agnostic. You don't care what endpoints, and from a security standpoint, you still want to maintain the security, but you maintain it at the centralized data model. So yes, they may be using a personal endpoint to get access, but you have security in place that prevents them from downloading that data to that personal device. Make sure that they have to go through the proper security channels to be able to access that data. And if that's two-factor authentication, even a VPN on top of that, you still have the ability to secure it, although you have one location as opposed to, thousands of endpoints that you may have to manage. So then, there are drawbacks to both of them. So, typically securing an endpoint, it's going to be a little CapEx heavier. And I would say in most situations, because you are purchasing hardware that has to be set up. So not only that, but the labor it takes to provision them, get them ready, ship them out, etc. There is more end user support when you do give the users more flexibility to secure an endpoint and work it from home and connect all their home printers, any of the other devices that go into that. It does have a little more, it's a little more labor intensive, from that perspective. And then, layering security on the endpoints is that there's only so much security you can layer on between before you have an imbalance between functionality of a user and being able to do their job, and too much security that makes it too rigid for them to do it. So there are elements to that from an endpoint perspective that can present challenges. In a VDI model, it's typically going to be, very OpEx, I say heavy or friendly. And so CapEx versus OpEx is something to really take into consideration when looking at both these models, simply because from an OpEx perspective, all the hardware that's serving up those VDI sessions, those virtual desktops, is all servers. So you have a lot of servers, which would be compute, storage, networking, bandwidth, et cetera, that you're typically going to be having as a infrastructure as a service model. So it is like renting them. So it will be a little more OpEx friendly or heavy. I guess it depends on what makes the most sense for the business. It is highly dependent on a stable internet connection. So in those low bandwidth areas, hopefully, fewer and farther between, you may have not as good of an experience, typically because you need a solid internet connection to be able to access those VDI environments. And I'd say the only other drawback really to VDI, one of the biggest being, it typically will be the most expensive in your total cost of ownership. So if you look at it in an apples to apples perspective, renting infrastructure versus buying endpoints, you're typically going to see that VDI is going to be more costly over the lifespan of, say, a 3-year lifespan. That's not to say it has to be, and it's not to say that either one is better, but you will see that VDI, and because you're renting that infrastructure, is going to be more expensive than the traditional model. So what does this all mean, and which one's better? There really isn't a good answer. It really is going to depend on the business. So the business needs should drive the technology strategy as opposed to the other way around. So CapEx, OpEx, that's certainly something to take into consideration. Which would you prefer? And from this needs to look at what types of users do you have? What types of data are you looking to secure? There is the possibility that you could go the hybrid route where some may, rely on VDI sessions and some may not. All of those need to be taken in consideration when worrying about it, but ultimately it needs to be the business's choice and what makes the most sense for the business. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to a use case and someone who's done this on a fairly large scale, Mr. Darren Bennett.
Thank you, Sean. So you guys may be asking, which environment do we use in this city? Is it the endpoint model or the centralized data model? And frankly, it depends. I'll get into that in the next couple slides. But before I do that, I wanted to comment that it's been a busy 6 months for my teams. When I was introduced at the beginning, I was introduced as the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer for the city. Actually, I wear 2 hats. That's one, and that's probably my favorite and arguably most important hat. I also lead the architecture and engineering team for IT, which is the network, the data center, the cloud, and of course, security teams. So what does that mean to you all? It means that I care a lot that the systems and network are running, available, and secure. And Sean alluded to, many of these things. He didn't allude, he flat out stated some of these things. The more people working remote, the more impact that can have on all of those items. We're gonna do just a quick overview of some information about the city. We're gonna talk about some of the challenges we experienced due to COVID from an IT and security perspective, and then some of the adaptations. I think we're waiting till the end for questions, if I remember correct, Jennifer. She's nodding, so that's okay, but please don't hesitate to write some down. I don't have all the answers, and if I don't, I'm not afraid to say so, and we can research it. But I do have some experience with this, and hopefully can tell you what did or didn't work for us in the city. Go ahead, next slide, please. So San Diego, I've heard it called the big city with a small town feel. I don't know if you guys are aware, but we're the 8th largest city in the US. And we were just before we started this meeting discussing the fact that we're the 2nd largest city in California. We have approximately in San Diego 1.5 million residents, and that's in San Diego City. The county has more if you include everything. The city has approximately 13,000 employees that are employed by the city, not 13,000 people employed all over the city, just within the city itself. Employed by the city of San Diego, I guess we should say, and 40 plus departments. Those numbers depends how you count them. There's a lot of wavering in there. If someone asks me what our critical systems are, I tend to tell them all of them, because pretty much if any of them go down, I get woken up, or minimum one of my managers does. But we host systems for the police, for fire, for city council, for public utilities and water. So there's some pretty important systems in there. How many IT systems do we have? It depends how you count it. You're going to hear me saying it depends a lot in the next couple slides, but somewhere around 1,000 servers that we host in our data center, and I say approximately 100. I think it's over 100 different SaaS solutions as well. I am a pretty big believer in keeping ourselves agnostic as far as vendors as much as possible. I know some people differ in that strategy. I really like that we have access and environment set up in all 3 of the major cloud providers. So Amazon's AWS, Google, and Azure. My stance for the team is that we need to be cloud smart. I know at one time everyone was talking about being cloud first. Well, cloud first sounds good, but I'd rather we be cloud smart, meaning we're using it at the right time. Another thing Sean spoke to, and I think Tom spoke to it too, is there are times that the cloud is great and cost effective, and there are other times it's not the right fit. That said, I definitely lean towards, for the most part, when a department is starting a new effort, my go-to question to them, if it's not cloud or SaaS based, is, can it be? And why isn't it? My experience has been in recent years that oftentimes the cost to entry is a little bit higher in the cloud, but once something is in the cloud, the long-term maintenance and management is much less, the availability is much higher, and in many ways it's easier to automate and secure. So our proposed budget for fiscal year 2020 is 103 million and change. And yes, there are cyber threats. Next slide, please. So challenges that we experienced during the COVID remote work transition. I almost need to take a breath after I say that, because there's a lot. I think probably the largest short-term one was, how can we efficiently provide remote access to our users? Were we doing that beforehand? Well, of course, right? We had, maybe a couple hundred contractors that did work for the city that had privileged access on the network using VPN, and we had employees that would periodically travel. But like everyone else, suddenly we went from, a couple hundred remote users at any given time to suddenly, thousands and thousands of remote users. This radically increased both our attack surface and the load on our network. We realized that, while we have pretty good data governance, we also needed to improve on that, and how we were going to, permit cloud access and controls, do monitoring and management, and still keep it cost effective. And there's no single silver bullet. We do a hybrid, as I said, between the endpoint and centralized data model, as Sean calls them. We use both, and unfortunately, there isn't a single perfect fit for most things in life. Go ahead, next slide, please. So what did we do? We did kind of a lot. The first thing we did was we ID'd, hey, what are our critical apps and access requirements? And things like computer-aided dispatch for PD and fire, that's pretty important, public safety systems, citizen-facing tools, so that the citizens can continue to pay their bills or determine, status of different things they utilize. Those were prioritized. We monitored network bandwidth utilization because we did see a huge jump in bandwidth usage for what I think is obvious reasons. The other thing that's interesting is, we were used to having a lot of traffic come from our internal network outbound. We weren't that used to suddenly having thousands of users access the internal network from the outside, from thousands of disparate devices. And, that was it. That was one of the largest challenges we had. For home users, several times they would contact us and early on and say, hey, you know what, we're having connectivity issues. We think the city's network's got problems. And, they'd be on the phone with the help desk. The help desk would be checking. And sure enough, we would look at the monitoring and say, nope, the city's network actually, we've been able to increase the pipelines. The vendors, by the way, everyone, they were heroic. I was really impressed with all of the vendors out there. The telecos, the ISPs, the cloud providers, some of them donated product and time and engineering. Of course they're smart. They know there's money in it for them in the long run, but they were really helpful. And we were able to increase the bandwidth citywide, double it in some areas when we needed to, just based on needs. So it wasn't a problem with our bandwidth. We were fortunate we were able to spin up, but you guys can probably guess what was happening. And that's it. When you have a network in someone's home and their kid is playing video games over the network on one computer, their other child is streaming Netflix, and then they're trying to do a Zoom call like we're doing right now, and the Zoom call is slow for some reason, there's not much that our teams at the city can do to help them with that. So we needed to re-educate the help desk personnel to ask the right questions, to work with the home users to ensure that they understand the limitations, and try to work out a schedule where, hey, can you maybe manage the time for your limited bandwidth that you have from your home? We also offered hotspots, a limited number. We didn't want to make it the standard across everyone that was a remote user, but we did offer hotspots for people that either didn't have connectivity or had just significant issues, and that was a real big help. Let's see, there's so much to cover. We were fortunate in that we already had two-factor and single sign-on enabled. I know some of my peers out there had one or the other, but maybe some limitations. I think that the fact that we needed to shift the focus from having everyone constantly log in remotely to their system and then use their system to access resources outside. Instead, we wanted the focus to be, if it's a SaaS product, let's direct them straight to the SaaS product and monitor that access. And then we're minimizing the amount of traffic going through ours. Had we not had two-factor and SSO already set up and had a good knowledge of that, that would have been a bigger challenge. One thing we did see was a radical increase in the number of targeted and opportunistic email and phishing and other cyber threats. I think everyone knows that. Our friends, and I use the term very loosely, our quote friends, they, like anyone else, will definitely take advantage regarding quote, hey, some are targeted specifically to the city saying, hey, City of San Diego COVID response, click here to get the details. Fortunately, we have a lot of controls in place to help filter and manage and monitor those, and our email system does a really good job preventing those from making it to the end user. Another thing that was very helpful for us is we worked with our VPN vendor. So for us, we did two primary, remote access means. There's VPN and VDI. From my perspective, in Darren's ideal world, I would have almost no one using VPN. We have a lot of users using VPN because they have specific needs and there are times that it's the right fit. But I have less control over a VPN connection than we do over a VDI desktop. Why? Because as you guys know, the VDI is a virtual desktop infrastructure. Sean did a great job of presenting on it, but it's like a desktop in a jail on the user system. So if I have a home user and they don't have a city computer, we require that they use VDI. We generally want to issue them a laptop so everyone is on a city issued computer accessing the city networks, because while VDI is good, it's not perfect. But what VDI does is it does help segment out that access. So if they're on a computer, suppose their home computer is perhaps not perfectly secured, which I don't know anyone's who is, and they want to connect to the city network, well, that opens up a whole new can of worms. But if they have VDI installed, now they're connecting to a virtual desktop environment within that little cage, and it's really protecting our network from what's going on that system otherwise. There's pluses and minuses to that, and Sean did a great job of talking to those. The cost things that Sean talked to, I was glad that he said when he was at first talking that, you know, OpEx, it's more expensive or less, and he kind of came back around and said it depends. That really has been my experience a lot. I think it's all about how you implement. I think that virtualization, whether it be desktop or moving things to the cloud, again, it's about being smart. And if you're smart and you choose the right scenario and you think it through, it can be a huge benefit where you can save a lot of money. If you don't do it properly, the cost can get out of control. For us, I think that the implementation was pretty expensive. We had a lot of funding. Some of that came in from what the CARES Act, if everyone's familiar with that, that's basically federal funding to help out with COVID emergencies. For remote work, we use some of that funding to help. Also the vendors, like I said, were very gung-ho to help out with that. So the initial cost, even though it was a little bit high, that helped waylay that. And I think long-term, it's going to save us quite a bit of money. I think things are going to be less expensive. It's a lot less expensive, in my opinion, to manage a remote desktop than it is to manage a full-blown regular desktop. Again, there's less threat. We created images for different departments. You know, if one has a call center, we have a call center image now, and we can automatically assign that to the people that need it. So when they connect to VDI, they get that image. If we have another group, we can just very easily create customized desktops. It's very useful. Finally, let's see if I'm missing anything. You know, I can't help but mention our partners. Microsoft worked with us. Amazon was great. They're who we worked with for our VDI. And again, in about just around 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, we were able to get the VDI set up with our friends at Amazon. We're still looking at some other options for remote access. And I wanted, to me, some advice for you guys is keep yourselves vendor neutral. Make real sure whoever you're choosing for your vendor solution does not lock you into a specific operating system. There's too much going on nowadays with so many different operating systems, you know, whether it be Chromebooks or Windows or Mac. You want a solution that, you know, you can host any of those in their platform. That's a big factor. The other thing is just maturity and ease of use. So last couple things I want to cover are monitoring and data loss prevention. So for past, monitoring wasn't, in my opinion, that difficult. We had our setup and our monitoring for internal network, and that's somewhat easy because we have, you know, choke points where we can see all the traffic coming and going. Suddenly we added, you know, all of these crazy, we expanded our footprint, our perimeter, as Tom talked about. It went from, you know, somewhat contained with a handful of people that were using it externally to suddenly the majority are using it externally. So we have all these new networks that we didn't control that had things like children playing games on them and using them for weird stuff. You know, we needed a way to govern that. Again, VDI helps a lot because then we're just choosing not to govern that, and we're saying we're only going to govern the work environment. We also do use excellent endpoint security software that helps track and report. For monitoring, the thousands of systems that are now accessing from the outside versus the hundreds, we use the whole suite of normal tools. I keep telling my team that it's new, but it's the same, or it's different, but it's the same, because it's the same tools that work. There are some new tools, some of the stuff that Tom is working on, but I mean, having a SIEM, a security incident event monitoring product set up and doing logging for access attempts and from where they're coming and what they're doing and being able to detect anomalies is critical. Having a security orchestration response platform, we have that in place that allows us to automatically do instant responses when we see certain triggers. And then of course our SOC, including after hours, has been helpful, but I'll tell you, those guys have certainly had their workload increase lately. Finally, data loss prevention. How do we govern and make sure that the data throughout the city that was previously, for the most part, contained within the city network, how do I ensure that that continues to be the case? And even within the city network, we have to make sure that, hey, credit card numbers or social security numbers or HR information are protected and put in and kept in the right place. And we have some really good data loss prevention solutions that we've implemented. We were able to link those into the SaaS solutions as well, and we can track the VDI and see if someone is doing something like sending data out to a private personal Google account. We can also block access to a personal Google account and require that they use the city one that's properly secured. The last thing is we use a cloud access security broker, or a CASB, and that just is really nice product because it manages access to the crazy number of cloud-based systems and apps that are out there. Again, just taking our perimeter and expanding it. So it wasn't free. The federal grants helped. Our partners out there in the tech world were huge help. I'm really proud of my team. I think that the fact that we've been able to adjust and go remote in such a short period of time is testament to human beings, and how most of us have been talking about doing more VDI, or allowing for more freedom for people to do work, remote work. And there's been a lot of red tape, and I'm not just talking in the city, I'm talking everywhere. And it's incredible how fast, when everyone's focus is on the same thing and the necessity's there, how fast we human beings are able to make things happen when we're all on the same page. And I know that Tom talked to some of this, but I think that overall is going to be a really good thing for us. I think that the future holds, hopefully this COVID thing will go away fairly soon. We'll get, whatever is needed to cure it, or to be able to, prevent it from spreading. And as we get back to a more quote normal life, we'll now have some flexibility we didn't have before, probably. Much like Tom said, ability to work remote more, ability to come in and meet when you need to. And I just think of how that saves the roads on traffic. It saves us on smog. Potentially, real estate, commercial realtors probably aren't going to love this time at first, but I think it opens opportunities for them to create, reuse that space maybe for things like housing. I think overall, we're going to come out of this in a better place than we started. So thank you guys for your time. If you have any questions, I'm more than willing to answer them.
Well, thank you so much, Darren. We're going to open up the floor for questions. I'm going to unshare the slide for a minute so you could see all of our presenters' faces, and then I'll throw it back up so that you can get their contact information. Let's see. We have several great questions. All right, I'm going to start with, this question is for Sean. What are the limitations of a virtual desktop versus the traditional endpoint?
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's one of those items that there really isn't going to be that much of a difference. The advancement with VDI, and when you look at, specifically around kind of, it's called the power users, where they do need a lot of graphics to be able to do their job. And that's anyone, if they're using AutoCAD, SolidWorks, big Photoshop editing, they do need the horsepower to be able to do that. So doing that in the VDI session in the, and say a few years ago was fairly costly and a little harder to do. It's become so readily available, and the providers out there, the technology that's out there really allow them to function just as they would on a regular desktop. So from a user experience or a user perspective, it's really not going to change all that much outside of how they access the data. It is kind of a cultural shift to be able to shift and say, here's kind of the direction we're going. It just takes a little time to get used to, but ultimately you're really not going to see that much of a difference.
Okay, great. All right, the next question I have, this is about PIN authenticated hardware encryption modules. So the question reads, I'd like to ask the panel, how do they feel about PIN authenticated hardware encrypted modules, which can encrypt data and information both in static state and in flight? They are also capable of encrypting the data in the cloud and be remotely or centrally controlled or managed. Do any of the panelists have any experience with these modules?
I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of experience with the modules, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, we have used them, and saying like we've used them in the past, and I think they are a good option, for us. And what we looked at was there's the software side, then there's the hardware side, and they'll both have benefits, to each one. And I think to the point of at rest and in transit is something that's, certainly, securing the data no matter what is something that has to be there. We've typically gone the software side for encryption as opposed to the hardware, except for infrastructure. And from a, storage at rest or data at rest model is that, all of the hardware would then be encrypted at the storage level. The need for kind of the HSMs that are out there, it really depends on how much data you're looking to transfer and what you're looking to do with it. We just haven't seen as big of a need, or haven't seen as much of a use case for them typically that I think some others transferring large amounts of data would.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sean, because our customers, they inquire at what level do we perform encryption. They want to make sure all their data, whether it's at rest or in transit, is encrypted somehow. And then the databases, they're always asking about, the storage underneath and the databases. So encryption is top of mind for most enterprises now, and it's just a requirement.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I think you guys make good points. I'm with you guys. I mean, we have used hardware for encryption, all of us do, and we've used PIN authenticated. I would say my stance isn't so much about the specific technology as about the fact that, when we go through our governance process and someone wants to use a new solution in their department, we have on our checklist right up top is, does it support SAML? Okay, great. Does it support end-to-end encryption and encryption of data at rest? I think that there are some advantages to doing a hardware encryption. It's, one less thing that human beings can make mistakes on. And there's still issues with that as well. So yeah, I echo what Tom and Sean said. I think the real key is that people realize, it's funny to me when I hear people that don't really understand the cloud or SaaS and they say, well, we don't control that, it's less secure. And I go, well, wait a minute. How is it any different if our data is stored in Amazon than if it was stored in a building across the street? As long as we encrypt it in transit and we have it encrypted in rest, it doesn't, if we manage and control those keys properly, it's as secure. And with what I would say higher reliability and higher availability, because no organization can afford the infrastructure of an Amazon or a Microsoft. So yeah, it's a really good question though.
All right, here's another one. What are 2 to 3 specific threats that IT and cybersecurity experts should be looking out for with remote home workers?
Oh man.
We just saw one yesterday. SMB Worm Tool did a brute force authentication attack on a small business we're monitoring, and then all of a sudden you see all these communications with Ukraine, which flagged us, and you could add the 10 or 12 communications that were over different ports and different size bytes being transferred. You add them up and they equal the exact size of the DLL threat that they're going to place on your computer, and it's really a ransomware attack, right? So, you've got to monitor things and look for strange, communications that are outgoing or going back and forth, and like Darren said, anomalous activity, and have good network monitoring tools so you could flag that very easily.
Yeah, there are so many. Again, I tell my team that the threats aren't necessarily new. It's just the environment that they can attack from or attack against is new. And what's hard for us, I mean, the biggest threat I think is controlling access when we have so many endpoints that are suddenly, we just have sprawl. A year ago we were talking about IoT sprawl and how we deal with that. At least from my perspective, IoT, to me, that's just more computers on my network, even if it's on a separate segment, and there's a lot of concern. But now those computers at least don't have a ton of sensitive data. Usually they're, stoplights or parking meters or other devices that just, they're important, but they don't host a whole bunch of PII. Now you have laptops where people have accounting information. It definitely ups the game for all of us. And for me, it's about control, and VDI helps with that. Issuing city laptops that are configured in such a way that they're encrypted, they're secured, and they can only connect through the city network. I think that's the future for all of us, is to how are we going to be able to keep track of that. And Tom's thing, in Tom's area, I'm kind of jealous of his area, because I do believe that AI is really, if not the fundamental, it's one of the biggest ways that we, knowing what is normal is important, and knowing how to find those exceptions. And then my team does it all day long. They're looking for, hey, we know normal traffic. We continue to look through it for badness, but you know what? We're seeing suddenly a huge bump in traffic from a system that we wouldn't expect it, or we're seeing different behavior. And that's, to me, that's kind of the future for us.
Yeah.
Darren, I just wanted to chime in on that and pick up on the AI topic, which we covered a little bit, but certainly this is a mega trend that we'll continue to see, and we really do see it now rolling out smoothly against many of these virtually based technologies, whether it's Microsoft 365, VDI. And I think, it's this notion that the only way to manage these complex environments is with a lot of automation. So I think we're seeing AI show up as a kind of an automation tool, starting maybe in cybersecurity, right? Some of the new kind of antiviruses, which took all of that, constant data of threats coming in, and using AI to distinguish which ones are the ones that are most important, because it's sort of the triage challenge. It's been one of the biggest challenges. I think we'll continue to see those types of challenges parse across all these systems, which are highly complex, but highly distributed as well. And AI is a perfect tool to help automate that.
All right, our next question. This is about the end user experience. Is there a difference in the user experience between using a virtual desktop or the VDI versus being on an endpoint?
Yeah, I mean, kind of along the same lines, is that, I mean, there really isn't. And I think the part from the organization, and I think from the IT team's perspective, it's much more, it's a much easier model as opposed to managing, all the endpoints, independently. Is that there's certainly automation you can do on endpoints, and it's not to take away from that, but managing a pool of VDI sessions and being able to customize them for specific business units, for the types of work, or all of those things. It really promotes a much more scalable means to do that. On the flip side, from the end user, kind of the same thing, is that you're able to access those the same way you would. It's a change in, again, it's a cultural change to really put kind of VDI in there and help educate the users why it's important you're going this way versus another model.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've seen is, if first of all, in the modern world, if you don't have connectivity, you're done to begin with for the most part. So that's where, for VDI, you have to have that connectivity, period. So for normal day-to-day working from home or working from wherever, VDI is very effective. If you're on the airplane, VDI is not very effective unless you're paying for and even then it may be a little slow paying for the satellite. But there's still a place for both. I do think, again, and I'm biased, but with the way that bandwidth has been increasing so much over the years and cost has been dropping, and truly, how many of us can survive without having bandwidth? I think that it's going to become, just like Sean said, it's more the norm. The only big difference is that you can't travel with it as easily, and in that case, that's why a laptop is still useful. And then you use your VDI session for when you need to connect back. What was the other thing? There is, and Sean, you did a really good job, dude, of talking about the flexibility thing. I live in a very biased mode, okay, because of what I do, and I know Sean does, I know Tom, I know everyone in this call does. But for me, control, you're doing a job. This is a tool. I want you to have the flexibility to do what you need to do, but that doesn't mean you need to be able to install any old software you want. And for end users, they don't like that sometimes. Yeah. And for a home user VDI, if it's on their home system, there's a lot of problems there. But for managed solutions, for things like you guys, Sean, do, that I think it's an awesome option. And then you can allow more flexibility if you want. It's easier to reel it in. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a tack on question there. We've talked for so many years about the importance of cyber hygiene, and that may represent 85-90% of the problem in cyber. How does cyber hygiene apply in this more virtualized world? Are there change modes of hygiene? Is there different things that we need to do in terms of that day-to-day diligence and keep on our network safe in those environments?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's gotten easier when you kind of go to more of a I focus on VDI because it's probably the most relevant conversation now. But it's gotten easier because instead of in the traditional method, you're deploying it to each endpoint. You have to manage it to each endpoint, make sure it stays up to date. And this is really where, when you look at the CIS-20, is that asset management being the first one. So if you don't have good asset management, it makes it extremely difficult for you to be able to say that everything is up to date and everything is the way it should be. Going in a VDI route where you're managing the pool of VDI sessions, what you end up doing is securing kind of, it's one instance of it as opposed to all of them. So from a management and from that cyber hygiene, it's a lot easier and it promotes a lot higher level of visibility into how secure the environment usually is. Unless you're deploying all this hardware to everyone's home, which, let's be realistic, it's not happening for most organizations. It makes it really hard to say with a high degree of confidence that you've promoted security so well that you're putting everyone in a position that they're protected. You can do the things you can do, and then at a certain point, budget starts to become a restriction. So in looking at that, is that if security being top of mind as it should be, it's a lot easier to say with that high degree of confidence that you could secure a centralized data model as opposed to the traditional endpoint model.
I have one more question about VDI. Can you talk about the VDI and telecom tools? Like, for instance, can you run a Zoom or Teams call on VDI?
Yeah, great question. And this is one, kind of stepping into it. I've asked these, questions multiple times, even to that point. You absolutely can. And they have specific applications that are, Zoom has a specific VDI application. So all of those tools, those collaboration tools, absolutely can run on them. The part where it starts to get, and this is where testing really comes into play, the way you slice up the kind of GPU side of it really becomes important and really requires a lot of testing. So the way that you deploy a VDI session with GPU, you can deploy it to the entire session so that like everything takes advantage of the graphics. You could deploy it to just specific applications too. So if applications require GPU and the other applications they use really don't, your traditional collaboration tools like Outlook, Word, etc. you can assign it to specific applications. So, you know, in all of this, the one thing that's really important to do is if you're going to go VDI, you have to test, you know, those sessions, you know, very thoroughly, because the last thing you want to do is say, hey, we're doing all of these awesome things with VDI and the user experience becomes poor. It's really hard to get that buy-in if they haven't been thoroughly tested.
And that's something we experience, certainly. You know, part of having that caged environment that I talk about is, you know, you can control how strictly caged it is. You can say, allow the mic, allow the camera on the local system to access the VDI session. Not necessarily the VDI individual user, but the way it's set up and administered. There's risk in that. So it's like everything, you know, Sean said it well, you have to test beforehand. But my experience has been there's very few things that you can't do in a VDI session that you could do at your desktop. I don't know if anyone here has experienced differently, but I really, sometimes it takes a little tweaking or a little testing, but yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, I think that wraps up our questions for today. I'm going to share the contact information of our stellar presenters. And then ask Darren Anderson, would you like to give us a little bit of a wrap up?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you, Jennifer, and Centrex for putting this presentation and webinar together. I hope that it was educational for everybody that joined. We'll be doing future educational series around this, so stay tuned for more from Centex. And I want to thank our special guest, Darren Bennett, Sean Ernst, and Tom Caldwell for joining today for their excellent presentations and the Q&A session. I look forward to meeting up with everybody again.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we also, you also recorded a podcast along a similar topic, right, Darren?
Yeah, this group recorded about a 1 hour and 5 minute podcast a few weeks ago, talking about some of these topics, but a number of other topics were covered as well. So check out Seamless Podcast. That was on the Smart Cities podcast channel. And I believe it's the latest one that we've dropped. So take a look there. You can get more content, more information. And again, look for more of those in the future.
Great. And if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to reach out and we'll get back to you with some answers, hopefully. We're all making this as we go. Like, that's why Sean's background, it's that nice exciting ride. That's
we
what
keep
we're
it
experiencing
interesting
here.
Yeah.
Hey, and one thing I want to add, please, is, you know, you guys, if you guys have heard things that myself, or I guess any of us have said, and you know a better way or a different way, we don't know it all. At least I don't. Sean and Tom and Darren probably do, and Jennifer, but I, you know, it's a two-way street here always.
Yep, absolutely. Even though I do know it all, it's good to hear.
Yeah,
you know, other people that,
We're always in learning mode, so yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
New challenges every day. Well, with that, I would like to thank everybody for participating today, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.